Please don't let them find me, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain as she collapsed against my front door. And for a moment, I just stood there, my hand frozen on the handle, because at 72 years old, living alone on a quiet street where nothing ever happened, you learn to be careful about opening your door to trouble. But something in her eyes, wide, terrified, and far too young, told me this wasn't the kind of trouble you turn away. So I opened the door and let her in. Her clothes were damp but not worn, her shoes muddy but expensive, details I noticed only later as I helped her sit down at my small kitchen table, wrapping her in an old blanket I'd kept since my husband passed, the kind of blanket that still carried warmth even after all these years. She kept looking over her shoulder, flinching at every passing car, her hands resting protectively over her stomach, and I realized then she was pregnant, no more than 17, maybe younger, and whatever she was running from, it wasn't something small. I made her tea, the way I always did, 2 teaspoons of sugar, a splash of milk, simple things that made a house feel safe, even when it wasn't, and she held the cup with both hands like it was the only thing keeping her steady. She didn't say much at first, just that she needed somewhere to stay for the night, that she'd leave in the morning, that no one could know she was here, and I nodded, even though every instinct told me there was more she wasn't saying. It wasn't until the storm quieted and the house settled into that deep silence I'd grown used to that I started noticing the details I couldn't ignore. The soft polish of her nails, the delicate gold bracelet on her wrist, the kind you don't find in a thrift store. And when she shifted in her chair, a glimpse of her phone caught my eye, its cracked screen still lighting up with notifications from names that sounded important. I didn't ask questions, not yet, because sometimes people need space before they can tell the truth. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this girl didn't belong in my world of secondhand furniture and fixed incomes, and I certainly didn't belong in hers. Then, sometime after midnight, as I turned on the small television in the corner of the kitchen to fill the silence, a breaking news alert flashed across the screen, and my heart stopped before my mind could catch up. Missing. Emily Carter, daughter of billionaire family, last seen 24 hours ago, and there she was, the same girl sitting at my table, her face clearer, brighter, nothing like the frightened child wrapped in my blanket. And for a long second I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, because the quiet life I had built, the one where nothing ever changed, had just been shattered by a knock I hadn't been prepared for. And somewhere outside, I thought I heard the low hum of engines pulling closer. I did not turn off the television right away, even though every instinct told me to, because there was something about seeing her face on that screen that made the room feel smaller, tighter, like the walls themselves were listening, and I found myself lowering the volume instead, as if that would somehow make the situation less real. Emily did not notice at first. She was staring down into her tea, her hands wrapped around the cup as though it could anchor her, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she flinched every time a car passed by outside, even though our street rarely saw more than a handful of vehicles after dark. I had lived in this house for over 40 years, long enough to know every sound it made, every creak in the floorboards, every distant hum from the road. And tonight those familiar sounds felt different, sharper somehow, like they carried meaning I could not yet understand. I stood there for a moment, watching her, and I realized something that unsettled me more than the news report itself. She had not come here by accident. People like her did not end up on streets like mine unless they were trying very hard to disappear. I walked slowly back to the table and sat down across from her, careful not to startle her, and for a few seconds neither of us spoke. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, louder than usual, marking each passing second like it mattered more tonight than it ever had before. Emily, I said quietly, testing the name as if it might break the fragile silence between us. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide, and in that instant I knew she understood exactly what I had seen. There was no denial in her expression, only fear, deeper now, more complicated than before. You saw it, she said, not as a question, but as a fact she could not undo. I nodded once. The television, I replied, keeping my voice steady, the way I had learned to do over the years when things felt like they were slipping beyond my control. She closed her eyes for a moment, and I watched as something shifted in her, as if the last bit of strength she had been holding on to was finally giving way. I did not have a choice, she whispered, her voice breaking just enough to tell me how much she had been carrying alone. I did not press her for more. I had raised a son once, long ago, and I remembered what it meant to wait, to let someone find their own words instead of forcing them out too soon. But my mind would not stay quiet. The name Carter echoed in my thoughts, heavy with everything it represented: wealth, influence, power, the kind of power that did not ask for permission. I thought about the bracelet on her wrist, the phone on the table, the way she carried herself even in fear, and I understood that whatever had driven her here was not something simple, not something that could be solved with a warm meal and a place to sleep. Outside, the low hum I had noticed earlier grew louder, more defined now, and I turned my head slightly toward the window, though I could not see much beyond the reflection of the kitchen light. Emily followed my gaze, her breath catching in her throat, and she reached across the table, her fingers gripping my hand with surprising strength. "If they find me," she said, her voice barely holding together, "they will not let me keep my baby." The words settled heavily between us, changing everything in an instant. I looked at her, really looked this time, not as a stranger who had knocked on my door, but as a young woman standing at the edge of something she could not control, and I felt that quiet shift inside me, the one that comes when you realize you're already part of something, whether you meant to be or not. The engines outside did not stop. They idled, steady and patient, as if whoever was out there had all the time in the world. And for the first time in years, my quiet little house did not feel like a place where nothing ever happened. It felt like the center of something I could not yet see, but knew I would not be able to walk away from. The sound of the engines did not fade, and that was what unsettled me most, because in this neighborhood, people did not wait outside with their cars running unless they had a reason, and whatever reason had brought them here tonight was now sitting across from me, her fingers still wrapped around mine, as if letting go would mean everything would fall apart. I did not pull my hand away. Instead, I turned it slightly and covered hers, a small gesture, but one that seemed to steady her just enough to keep her from unraveling completely. "How did you get here?" I asked, keeping my voice low, careful, because questions had to be asked the right way when fear was already filling the room. She hesitated, her eyes flicking once more toward the window, then back to me, and I could see the calculation there, the weighing of trust against whatever consequences might follow. "I took a bus," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Free, actually. I just kept going until I thought I was far enough." Far enough. The words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning, because people do not travel that far unless they are running from something that does not give up easily. I glanced toward the television again, where her face had disappeared, replaced by a weather update that felt absurdly normal, and I reached over to turn it off completely this time, letting the silence settle in fully. "They will not stop looking for you," I said, not as a warning, but as a simple truth. She nodded, her grip tightening slightly. "I know," she replied. "That is why I cannot go back." I studied her face, the exhaustion etched into it, the determination underneath it, and I realized she was not asking for help in the way most people did. She was not asking for comfort or reassurance. She was asking for protection, even if she did not say the word out loud. Outside, one of the car doors opened, the sound sharp and deliberate in the quiet night, followed by the low murmur of voices I could not quite make out, and I felt something shift inside me again, something older than fear, something steadier. I had lived long enough to understand that power did not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrived quietly, parked outside your home, waiting for you to decide what kind of person you were going to be. Emily's eyes filled with panic as she heard it too, and she leaned closer, her voice trembling now despite her effort to stay calm. "They found me," she said, the words barely forming before she pressed her lips together as if she could take them back. I shook my head slowly, not in denial, but in refusal to accept the conclusion she had already reached. "Not yet," I said, my tone firmer now, more certain than I felt just moments ago. I stood up from the table, moving toward the window with measured steps, careful not to draw attention, and I shifted the curtain just enough to see the street beyond. Two black vehicles sat at the curb, their headlights off but engines still running, silhouettes moving inside. Patient, controlled, the kind of patience that comes from knowing you usually get what you came for. I let the curtain fall back into place and turned to look at her again. Really look this time. not as a stranger or even as a missing person from a headline, but as someone who had chosen my door out of every door she could have knocked on. "Listen to me," I said quietly, walking back toward her, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. "If you are here, then you are here for a reason." She searched my face, as if trying to understand what I meant, and I could see the question forming before she spoke it. "Why would I come here?" she asked, her voice small, uncertain. I held her gaze, letting a faint, almost imperceptible smile touch my lips, not out of comfort, but out of something else, something that had been waiting a long time beneath the surface of my quiet life. "Because," I said softly, "you needed someone they would never think to look for." The room felt smaller after I said it, as if the truth had taken up space between us, and Emily looked at me like she was trying to decide whether I was someone she could trust or just another mistake she had made in a long line of desperate choices. I did not rush her. At my age, you learn that silence can be more convincing than words, and I simply turned back to the table, picking up her empty cup and rinsing it slowly at the sink, letting the ordinary sound of running water settle the moment. Outside, another car door closed. More voices now, still low but closer, and I knew we did not have much time before those quiet intentions turned into something more direct. "You cannot stay in the front of the house," I said calmly, drying the cup with a towel that had been folded the same way for years. "If they come to the door, they will expect to see someone like me. They will not expect to see you." She stood up quickly, her chair scraping softly against the floor, her fear rising again. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice unsteady despite her effort to control it. I turned to face her, really taking in how young she was, how much she was trying to carry on her own, and I felt that same quiet certainty settle deeper inside me, the kind that does not come from confidence, but from experience. "We are going to slow down," I said. "Panicking will only make this easier for them." She shook her head slightly, as if the idea of slowing down felt impossible when everything in her world was moving too fast. "You do not understand," she said. "They always find a way." I held her gaze, steady and unyielding. "Maybe they do," I replied softly, "but not tonight." For a moment, she said nothing, and in that silence, I could see something shift in her again, a small piece of belief returning, fragile but real. I moved toward the hallway and gestured for her to follow me, my steps measured, deliberate, as if this were just another ordinary night in a house that had seen decades of quiet routines. The hallway light flickered slightly as I passed, something it had done for years, without ever being fixed, and I opened the door to the small back room, a space that had once been my son's, now used mostly for storage and memories I did not revisit often. "You can stay here for now," I said, stepping aside to let her enter. The room was simple, a narrow bed, a dresser, a window that faced the backyard instead of the street, hidden from view unless someone knew exactly where to look. She hesitated at the doorway, glancing back toward the front of the house where the faint outline of headlights now stretched across the curtains. "What if they come inside?" she asked quietly. I paused, considering the question, not dismissing it, because it was a fair one. Then I reached into the drawer by the door and pulled out an old envelope, its edges worn but its contents intact, something I had kept for reasons I had never fully explained, even to myself. "Then we will be ready," I said, placing it in my hand, feeling its weight, not heavy, but significant. She watched me, confusion mixing with hope, and I could tell she wanted to ask more, but the sound of a firm knock at the front door cut through the moment, sharp and undeniable this time. I did not flinch. I did not rush. I simply looked at her one last time and gave a small nod, the kind that carries more meaning than words ever could. "Stay quiet," I said softly, before turning toward the front of the house, my steps steady, my expression calm, because whoever was standing on the other side of that door was about to meet someone they had already underestimated. I did not hurry as I walked toward the front door, even though the knocking came again, firmer this time, more certain, because rushing would have meant I was afraid, and I had learned a long time ago that fear was something people like them could sense before you even spoke a word. The envelope rested lightly in my hand, its edges worn from years of being kept, forgotten, then remembered again, and I slid it calmly into the drawer by the entry table before reaching for the handle. For a brief second, I paused, not out of hesitation, but to steady the rhythm of the moment, the same way I used to before opening a difficult letter or answering a phone call that I knew would change something. Then I opened the door. Two men stood on the porch, both dressed in dark suits that fit too perfectly to belong to this neighborhood. Their posture straight, their expressions controlled, the kind of control that is practiced, not natural. Behind them, the black vehicles waited at the curb, engines still running, quiet but present, like a promise that they were not leaving without what they came for. "Good evening, ma'am," the man in front said, his tone polite, almost rehearsed, but there was something beneath it, something that did not ask for permission so much as expect compliance. I gave a small nod, keeping my hand on the door, not opening it any wider than necessary. "Evening," I replied, my voice steady, neutral, offering nothing more than what was required. His eyes moved past me briefly, scanning the interior of the house without turning his head, a subtle gesture, but one that told me everything about how accustomed he was to entering places uninvited. "We are looking for someone," he continued, as if the situation were simple, as if this were just another routine stop. "A young woman. She may have come through this area." I let a moment pass before responding, just long enough to suggest I was considering his words, not reacting to them. "This is a quiet street," I said calmly. "People do not usually pass through here unless they live nearby." It was not a lie, just not the answer he wanted. The second man shifted slightly, his gaze sharper, less patient, and I could feel the tension beginning to change, the polite surface thinning just enough to reveal what lay underneath. "If she did come by," the first man said, his voice still measured, "it would be in her best interest to return with us." I held his gaze, not challenging, but not yielding either, and I noticed the faintest flicker of surprise in his expression, as if he had expected something different from me, something easier. "I have not seen anyone," I replied, the words simple, unembellished, the kind that leave no room for interpretation. For a second, no one spoke. The night seemed to hold its breath, the quiet, stretching just enough to make the moment feel longer than it was. Then the man gave a small nod, as if acknowledging an answer he could not immediately dispute. "If you do," he said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a card, which he held out toward me, "we would appreciate a call." I looked at the card, then back at him, and after a brief pause, I accepted it, not because I intended to use it, but because refusing would have said more than accepting ever could. "Of course," I said softly. He studied me for a moment longer, his eyes searching for something he could not quite find, and then he stepped back, giving a slight incline of his head before turning toward the vehicles. The second man followed without a word, and within seconds, they were inside, doors closing quietly, engines still running for just a moment longer before one by one, the cars began to move, pulling away from the curb with the same controlled precision they had arrived with. I stood there until the sound of them faded completely, until the street returned to its usual stillness, and only then did I close the door, turning the lock with a soft click that felt louder than it should have. I remained there for a moment, my hand resting against the wood, my thoughts settling into place, and then I walked back down the hallway, my steps unhurried, because this was not over, not even close. When I reached the back room, I paused at the door before opening it gently. Emily looked up at me, her eyes filled with questions she had not dared to ask, and I gave a small, calm nod. "They are gone," I said. Then I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, and for the first time since she had arrived, I allowed myself to sit down across from her, my gaze steady, my voice quiet but certain. "Now," I said, folding my hands in my lap, "you are going to tell me everything they do not want me to know." Emily did not speak right away, and I could see the struggle in her face, the way her thoughts seemed to move faster than her words, as if she had been holding everything in for so long that letting it out now felt almost impossible, and I did not interrupt her, because I knew that whatever she was about to say had been buried under fear, under pressure, under expectations that someone her age should never have to carry. She looked down at her hands, resting again over her stomach, and for a moment the room felt very still, like time itself had slowed just enough to give her space to decide. "They planned everything," she finally said, her voice quiet but clearer now, as if speaking the truth gave her just enough strength to continue. I leaned back slightly in my chair, not out of distance, but to give her room, to show her that I was listening, not judging. "The baby," she went on, her fingers tightening slightly. They said it would ruin everything. She swallowed, her eyes glistening but not falling apart, and I could tell she had practiced holding herself together like this, probably for days, maybe longer. My father said it was not part of the plan, that people would talk, that investors would question things, that it would damage the family name. The words came slowly, but each one carried weight, not exaggerated, not dramatic, just heavy with the kind of reality that does not need embellishment. I said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would not interrupt the truth she was finally allowing herself to speak. They wanted me to fix it, she continued, her voice trembling slightly now, quietly, quickly, like it never happened. She paused again, her breath unsteady, and I watched her carefully, making sure she stayed grounded in the moment, not lost in whatever memories were pressing in. But I could not, she said, shaking her head faintly. I could not do that. There was something in the way she said it, something firm beneath the fear, and I recognized it immediately, that quiet refusal that does not need to be loud to be unbreakable. So they decided for me, she added, her voice dropping, not in fear this time, but in something closer to disappointment. They arranged appointments. They made calls. They told everyone I was taking time away for school, for health, for whatever sounded believable. She let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but without any humor. They had everything planned except me leaving. I felt my hands fold together in my lap, a habit I had when I was listening closely, and I nodded slightly, not encouraging, just acknowledging. How did you get away? I asked gently. She looked up at me, and for the first time since she had arrived, there was a flicker of something different in her eyes, something closer to determination than fear. My mother's nurse helped me, she said. She said I needed time, that I deserved to choose for myself. She hesitated, then added softly. She told me to find someone who would not be afraid of them. Her gaze stayed on mine as she said it, searching, measuring, and I understood then that this was not just about hiding anymore. This was about trust. Outside, the night had gone quiet again, but the silence no longer felt empty. It felt like a pause, the kind that comes before something shifts. I took a slow breath, letting everything she had said settle into place, and then I leaned forward slightly, my voice calm, steady, but carrying a quiet certainty that had not been there before. Then you came to the right place, I said. She studied me for a moment longer, as if trying to understand what I meant, and I could see the question forming before she asked it. Why are you not afraid of them? She said softly. I held her gaze, letting the answer come naturally, not rushed, not forced, just something that had been waiting beneath the surface for longer than she could imagine. Because, I replied, my voice quiet but unwavering. I have seen what happens when people like them think no one will stand in their way. Emily held my gaze after I spoke, as if she was trying to measure the weight of my words, trying to decide if they were real or just something said to comfort her, and I did not look away, because I knew that doubt would only grow if I did. The room felt quieter now, not empty, but focused, like everything had narrowed down to this moment. This fragile understanding between two people who had only just met, but were already bound by something neither of us had planned. What happens now? She asked, her voice softer than before, but steadier, as if telling the truth had given her something solid to stand on. I leaned back slightly, letting out a slow breath, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to choose my next words carefully. Now, I said, we stop reacting to them, and we start thinking ahead of them. She frowned slightly, not in disagreement, but in confusion, and I could see that she was used to being told what to do, not how to think. They have money, people, influence, she said. They always know where to look. I nodded once. Yes, I replied calmly. They know where to look for someone like you. I let that settle before continuing. But they do not know where to look for someone like me. Her eyes shifted slightly, something beginning to change in the way she saw the situation, not safer, but different. You said a nurse helped you, I added. Someone who knew what your family was planning. She nodded slowly. She told me to go somewhere small, somewhere quiet, somewhere no one would expect. I gave a faint, knowing look, not quite a smile, but close enough to carry meaning. Then she understood more than you think, I said. Outside, the night remained still, but it was no longer the stillness of ignorance. It was the stillness of waiting, of watching, of something that had not finished yet. I stood up again, moving toward the small dresser in the corner of the room, and opened the top drawer, pulling out a neatly folded stack of papers, the same envelope I had set aside earlier now in my hand again. Emily watched me closely, her curiosity rising despite her fear. "What is that?" she asked. I paused for a second, looking down at the envelope before answering. "Something I never thought I would need again," I said quietly. I turned back to her and held it out, not fully giving it to her, but letting her see that whatever was inside mattered. "Your family is not the first to try to control a story," I continued, my voice calm, "but carrying something deeper now, something rooted in experience rather than theory. And they will not be the last." She hesitated, then reached out slowly, her fingers brushing the edge of the envelope but not taking it yet. "You knew people like them before?" she asked. I met her eyes, letting the answer come without hesitation. "I knew someone who worked for them," I said. "Closer than you would expect." The words hung between us, not fully explained, but heavy enough to change everything. Emily's expression shifted again, not just fear now, but realization, the understanding that she had not ended up here by accident, that something about this place, about me, was not as simple as it seemed. "So you know what they are capable of?" she said slowly. I nodded once. "Enough to know that they will come back," I replied. "And next time, they will not just knock." The room fell silent again, but it was not the same silence as before. This one carried preparation, intention, the beginning of something deliberate. I placed the envelope back into the drawer, closing it gently, then looked at her with a steadiness that left no room for doubt. "Which means," I said, my voice low but firm, "we do not wait for them to make the next move." Emily did not speak immediately after I said it, but I could see the shift in her posture, the way her shoulders straightened just slightly, as if something inside her had moved from fear into focus. And that was what mattered most now. Not that she felt safe, because she was not, but that she was beginning to think, to see beyond the moment she had been trapped in since she ran. "What do you mean?" she asked quietly, her voice steady enough now to carry more than just fear. I walked slowly back toward the kitchen, not because I needed anything there, but because movement helped me think, helped me place each step of what needed to happen next. "They are used to controlling every part of the story," I said, my voice calm, even, the kind of tone that does not invite panic. "Where you go, who you speak to, what people believe about you." I paused by the counter, resting my hand lightly against the surface that had seen years of quiet mornings and uneventful nights, until tonight. "So we do something they are not prepared for," I continued. She followed me into the kitchen, slower this time, more careful, as if she was already beginning to understand that rushing was not the answer. "And what is that?" she asked. I turned to face her, studying her expression, making sure she was ready to hear what came next. "We make your story visible," I said simply. The words settled between us, and I could see the hesitation immediately, the instinct to pull back, to hide, to disappear again. "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "If they see me, they will take me back." I did not argue with her fear, because it was not wrong. Instead, I stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough to keep the moment contained. "They can control a quiet situation," I said. "They can move things behind closed doors, make decisions without anyone asking questions." I let that sink in before continuing. "But they cannot control what is seen by too many people at once." She looked at me, her brow slightly furrowed, thinking, not rejecting, just trying to understand. "You mean tell someone?" she asked. I shook my head slowly. "Not someone," I replied. "Everyone." The word hung there, larger than anything we had said so far, and I could see the weight of it pressing against her thoughts. "That is dangerous," she whispered. I nodded once. So is staying silent. For a moment, neither of us spoke, and the quiet of the house returned, but it felt different now, not like something closing in, but like something waiting to be broken. I moved toward the small table and reached for my old phone, the one I rarely used for anything beyond simple calls, and turned it over in my hand, considering it for a second before setting it back down. "There are people who listen when a story does not make sense," I said. "People who ask questions when something feels wrong." She watched me carefully, her breathing slower now, more controlled. "And you know those people?" she asked. I gave a faint, almost knowing look, not quite answering, but not denying it either. "I know how to reach them," I said. "Outside." The street remained quiet, but I knew better now than to trust that quiet. It was not an ending. It was a pause. I stepped closer to her again, my voice lowering just enough to carry weight without urgency. If we do this, there is no going back, I said. Once your story is out, they cannot pretend it does not exist. She looked down at her hands, then back up at me, and for the first time since she had arrived, I saw something stronger than fear in her eyes. They already decided my life without me, she said softly. I am not letting them decide this too. I held her gaze for a moment, then nodded, once, firmly, because that was all the confirmation I needed. Good, I said quietly. Then I turned toward the hallway again, my steps steady, deliberate, as if everything that had been quiet for years was now moving with purpose. Because they are about to learn something they never expected, I added, my voice calm but carrying a certainty that did not need to be explained. What happens when the wrong person refuses to stay invisible? I did not waste time once she said it, because hesitation was exactly what people like her family relied on. The small pauses where doubt could creep in and turn a decision into regret, and I had no intention of letting that happen tonight. I walked straight to the living room and reached for the old wooden cabinet near the window, opening it with a quiet click and pulling out a small, outdated laptop I had not touched in years, not because it no longer worked, but because I had not needed it to, not until now. Emily followed me slowly, her steps quieter, more deliberate, as if she was already stepping into something she did not fully understand yet, but was ready to face anyway. Sit, I said gently, motioning toward the chair beside the table, and she obeyed without question this time, her eyes fixed on me as I powered the device on, the soft hum filling the room as the screen flickered to life. You said you know how to reach people, she said, her voice calm but cautious, and I nodded once as I began typing, my fingers moving with a familiarity that had not faded despite the years. I do not reach people the way you think, I replied. I reach the kind of people who cannot ignore something once it is in front of them. The login screen appeared, and for a brief second, I paused, my hand hovering over the keyboard, not out of uncertainty, but because I knew exactly what this meant, not just for her, but for me. Then, I typed the password without hesitation. Emily leaned slightly closer, her curiosity rising as she watched lines of old emails, archived documents, and saved contacts begin to load, things I had not looked at in a long time, things I had once been part of before choosing a quieter life. Who are these people? She asked softly. I did not look at her right away. Journalists, I said. Legal advocates. People who build stories out of what others try to hide. Her breath caught slightly, not in fear this time, but in realization. You worked with them? She asked. I allowed myself a small, almost distant nod. A long time ago, I replied, before I decided I had seen enough of how power works. I opened a new message, the blank screen waiting, and I let my thoughts settle into something clear, something precise, because this was not just about telling a story. This was about making it impossible to ignore. What do I say? Emily asked quietly, her hands resting over her stomach again, but no longer trembling the way they had before. I turned the screen slightly toward her, meeting her eyes with a calm steadiness. You tell the truth, I said. Not everything. Not yet. Just enough to make them ask questions your family cannot control. She nodded slowly, taking a breath as if preparing herself for something larger than fear. Outside, the street remained still, but I knew that stillness would not last. It never did. I began to type, each word measured, each sentence carrying weight without revealing too much, just enough to open a door that could not be closed again. A missing girl, a hidden pregnancy, a powerful family with something to protect. I did not need to say more than that. When I finished, I read it once, then turned to her. This is where it changes, I said quietly. She looked at the screen, then back at me, and I could see it clearly now, not fear, not doubt, but resolve. Then send it, she said. I held her gaze for a second longer, then pressed the key. The message left instantly, disappearing into a network far beyond this quiet street, far beyond the reach of the people waiting for control. I closed the laptop slowly, the soft click echoing in the room, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I looked at her, my voice calm, certain, carrying the quiet weight of what we had just set in motion. Now, I said, they are not just looking for you.